sick, so hopefully my voice will hold out here. So yes, I was on sabbatical spring quarter, and the goal of my sabbatical was to create the patron data privacy policy for the library. It had been a goal of ours for a long time, and I just never had the time to isolate that and knock it out. So that's kind of what I based my sabbatical project around, just for one quarter. So I was going to present kind of the process that I went through, and then the actual output and some of the deliverables, in case any of you are needing to do the same thing. Maybe I can cut out some of the steps for you, or provide an example of what we did in case that works for you. So I am going to attempt to share without kicking myself off here. Like I said, I've been having issues with my old computer at work and at home. And I mostly am having issues when I try to share websites. So I think that sharing my PowerPoint will be okay. Oh, I have frozen. Here we go. This happens when I go to share, I freeze.
We did hear you though the whole time. So that
okay, good to know. I just can't see or hear you. Okay, so are you seeing the big slide? It says patron data privacy.
Yep.
Okay, so I will start there. So why did we feel this was important enough for me to make a sabbatical project around? Data privacy obviously is important, and maybe becoming even more important over the next few years. But I looked at some studies from Pew Research Center, and across the board, patrons are concerned with how their data is used and stored and handled. So I just have a couple of charts here. So they are concerned about how companies are using their data, a little bit less concerned, but still concerned about the government, but also don't understand what's happening with the data. Okay. Whoops. On the flip side, people don't read the privacy policies of the services that you're using. And so you can see on the chart on the right, while Americans are concerned about their data privacy, they don't help themselves. They don't read about how their data is being collected and used. So you can see the Venn diagram. There's a whole bunch of people who are concerned but don't do anything about it. Oh, I'm having trouble skipping to the next slide. Here we go. So I thought this was cute. Found this online. Looking into new information and accept that we've been making poor decisions, but ignore the new information in favor of our bad habits. So that's kind of the landscape. But also, we are a library and we collect patron data too, and we store it. We also, and this was really important to me, we promote a lot of vendors that we have no control over, like databases, the operating systems and the search engines that are displayed on the computers in our labs, et cetera. And we also have a traditional role as educators and information literacy and digital literacy educators. And finally, the Library Bill of Rights says that we should have a patron data privacy policy. You can see here, it is essential that libraries maintain an updated, publicly available privacy policy that states what data is being collected, with whom it's shared, how long it is kept. And so all of this was great support for my sabbatical project, right? If our governing organization says that it is essential that we have this document, then we need to have this document. So my sabbatical project had several goals. One was to create the policy, obviously, and that's the one I'm going to speak the most about. And then also creating resources for our patrons, for students and faculty, typically to build interest and awareness about their data and to start asking these questions and to start reading privacy policies of the services that they use. And of course, a third goal was to rest, rejuvenate, and then I explored a personal intellectual pursuit, which was starting my Welsh language learning journey. And feel free to pop in if you have any questions. All right, so just a quick slide here about the library patron data lifecycle. I think those of us who work in Alma are already familiar with this cycle, right? We collect it, we store it, we access it for the purposes we need it for. Not sure about reporting. Obviously, we retain the data and then we anonymize, purge, eventually delete the data. So my methodology was on the right-hand side there. I inventoried the data that the library stores, and this is mostly in Alma. So we store, we pull our data in from CTC Link, so obviously name, address, phone number, email. That's about all that we do, a preferred name. We don't do course of study and some things like that that I think you can potentially pull in. And then I wanted to do an inventory, just where are all the places that we're storing data? And there are a few places outside of Alma too. And then I wanted to formalize our practices with using and storing and deleting that data, because when we set up Alma, however many years ago now, we just kind of like threw numbers at the wall and to see if they'd stick, and we have never revisited it. So I wanted to, for example, choose a period of time that our letters are retained before those are deleted. That was kind of uniform and that made sense. Another example, we were running our loan anonymization job every day at midnight. And then we had to change that a little bit during the pandemic because we weren't necessarily checking in materials the same days that they were dropped off, and we were missing some damage that was done. So once you anonymize the loan, you don't know who had it, and so you can't hold anybody responsible. So just making more uniform and more informed decisions now that we've been using Alma for quite a while. And then I wanted to research applicable laws and regulations to make sure we weren't in violation of anything by getting rid of our information relatively quickly compared to other offices. And then I wanted to review the privacy policies of all of our vendors, all of our database vendors, all of our services like Ex Libris and OCLC for Easy Proxy and things like that. And then drafting the policy. So I did a large inventory and just added a few slides the other day to this presentation for you all. I think most of you know this, but just to tie it into Alma specifically, some of the tools in Alma that can help us with controlling our patrons' data are the anonymization job. And there are different things that you can anonymize. We've chosen to not anonymize fines and fees. We wanted to keep those financial records, but the other ones that don't carry any fines or fees associated with them, we anonymize, and we've chosen to do it now on a weekly job on Saturday rather than a nightly job. This is just a little snippet of our Alma letter retention. So how many, when we send a fair number of letters. For example, when an item is returned, you get the return receipt. We do the courtesy letter, I think that is once a month. So there's a number of letters that we send out, and copies of those, as you all probably know, are kept permanently in Alma attached to the patron's record unless you delete them. So anonymizing the loan is one thing, but if you've sent out any other emails or letters to them about the loan, then there's still a record of what they had loaned out. So it was important to us to also get rid of all of those letters. And they were all different kinds of retention periods. So we made our default period 14 days for the most part, with a few exceptions. That was something I wanted to go in and get a hold on. And then the other thing that will come up in the policy is it's always great if you can give patrons a way to request the data that you have on them, and Alma does have a way to do this. If you go to the user record, about partway down the page on the right, there's this little box that says send message, and if you use the drop down, there's some different options, and one of them is patron personal information mail. And if you select that and then send them that, it sends them, I think it's an XML file with all of the data that we have on them in our system, which isn't particularly useful for the average patron, I'm guessing, because you really ought to probably convert the XML file into a more readable form for patrons, but this is the way that Alma has it right now. On my to-do list is to work out instructions for converting that file to a more readable format for our patrons. I don't think I've ever had a patron request this information, but it is in our policy now that you can request it, and this is how we would do it. Carly, do you have anything to add about that? I've tried it and it works.
I mean, that is very cool. I did not know that was an option. And it's probably something that I could work on instructions for too.
I'm kind of skipping around here, but again, one of the things that I did was I reviewed all of the privacy policies, and there's just a smattering of some of their logos. And here's what I found. Happily, for the most part, our database vendors, their privacy policies weren't very concerning to me. They use, well, first of all, we're using a proxy server. So they're getting very little data being passed through about our patrons, because right now, and I think maybe this is one of the benefits of the older style of the IP address based proxying, is all of our students are getting passed through a single IP address. It would be very hard to track them or collect profiles about individual students. And the vendors, basically their policies for the most part say that they are just using information to provide the service. And the only thing they collect is, IP address. And it didn't concern me for the most part. Where they do start collecting more data is if students create accounts on those sites. For example, a MyEBSCO account. Then they have your email address, they have your name, and they have data about what you do when you're using their product, and so they can create profiles specifically about a specific person. And again, they didn't seem to be selling or giving this data away, with some exceptions. I was not happy that our contract with Canopy requires that they set up a Canopy account to use it. So we've got some weird system that we're grandfathered into, but part of that, it's our only database where you have to create a vendor account, to use the product. So I wasn't very happy about that. While the database privacy policies for using the databases were pretty benign, I did in some cases go a little further, for example, with Gale, and looked at their privacy policy as concerns their e-textbooks, which we don't provide, but it could be that some of our faculty are using and requiring online textbooks. And this is where I ran into some issues. And also with like our bookstore, I looked up Follett privacy policy and Barnes & Noble privacy policy and the Gale Cengage e-textbook policy. And those were very concerning. They collect as much data as they possibly can. They use it for their own marketing purposes. They do sell it to third parties. They may give it to governments, government entities upon request. So I do have concerns outside of library databases, more on the side of the institution. And so I've started becoming pretty vocal on campus these last few weeks, especially as we're considering doing something other than our Barnes & Noble bookstore. And then also, like I said, I have a lot of concerns about e-textbook vendors. So any questions about that before I move on. I encourage you all to also, as you have time, read privacy policies. So I also wanted to look a little bit into data privacy laws just for my own knowledge. And like I said, to make sure we're not in violation of anything with the policy that we developed. And again, a few more slides. Again, most adults are saying they don't really understand the laws and regulations that are put in place to protect them, but there is large bipartisan support for having regulations limiting how our personal data as consumers is used, which is good to see. So not everybody, lots of people are concerned and would like protection. So what are some of those protections? So this legislative session, as in many prior, there was an act introduced to formalize data protections for all Americans. And this year it was called the American Privacy Rights Act. I haven't looked at it in the last couple of weeks, but as of probably about 2 weeks ago, it was just kind of dying in committee, which seems to be what happens to it most every year. Right now, how data is handled seems to be controlled largely by states, and some states have really strict and strong laws like California. Washington's pretty good. California is really strict, but we don't have a federal level set of regulations. The other one that helps us is Europe's laws and GDPR. I'm afraid to click on the link because I don't want to lose you all again. I'm trying to think what GDPR stands for at the moment. I should have written it out here. Global Data Protection, maybe. So these are the privacy rights afforded to Europeans. So if you're part of the European Union, this policy applies to you. And they are pretty strict and strong laws for companies that interact with any European. So we get a lot of protection from this because a lot of the companies that are working in the US and have websites that we use also work in European Union and face Europeans. And so they're required to follow those rules, and a lot of companies are just following them across the board here too. So we are seeing quite a bit of protection from Europe's laws. And then of course we have FERPA, which it protects the educational record. We're pulling some of that educational record in, so some of the data we pull in is already protected. Also, I looked at the Washington Community and Technical College's records retention schedule because there is I believe it's a WAC that is very, very detailed. It's not a WAC, it's its own document. So it goes into great detail about all the different kinds of records that a college collects about their students and all kinds of things and how long those records need to be kept. Well, the library is exempted from the Community and Technical Colleges retention schedule and is pulled out and addressed in the general retention schedule for the state. So if you go into the technical or the community college one and go to libraries, it says libraries follow this other one. And when you go to the other one, basically libraries can do what they want, which is good. We don't have to retain data for very long at all. We just retain it for the amount of time that we need it to conduct our business, which is really good because a lot of records have to be stored for 5 years or 7 years at colleges, and the library records don't. One of the exceptions is financial records. And I've been trying to get answers about whether or not that is on the library here at our school or on the cashier's office. Here at Olympic College, the libraries don't handle money. That was taken away from us a number of years ago now. So if people have fines or want to add printer points, anything to do with money, they have to go do it at the cashier's office. So we believe that it is on the cashier's office to be keeping those financial records. The fact that we have assigned fines or fees and sent a letter about those fines or fees, we are interpreting as not being the financial record. But I'm still trying to get clarification on that. And then public records requests, library records are exempt from public records requests. And so if there is a public record request and it would somehow involve communications that you have had with a patron, those should be exempted. And that applies not only to our emails, but it should also apply to our chats and any other records that we have. So I'll send a copy of these slides out, but I have links to all of these things. Like I said, I've been having issues with Zoom when I try to open a web page, so I don't want to get kicked out. Any questions about those? I see some stuff in the chat here. Okay, you're putting my links out there. Thank you so much. Okay. And then lastly, before I actually show the policy, just some trends. We're seeing this mergers and acquisitions. For example, ProQuest bought Alexander Street Press, and ProQuest bought Ex Libris, and then Clarivate bought ProQuest. And that's all well and good, except that if you go to the Clarivate website and their About Us page, or Relics, which is, what is that? Reed Elsevier, Lexis. Those larger companies are marketing themselves as data brokers, basically, information brokers. So analytics. So all of these companies that they're swallowing up, they are using the data gathered from them, anonymized, to sell, to repackage and sell and give insights to people who are willing to pay. So we are providing what they're selling. I don't know if you feel like that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just something to understand that that's what's happening. It is not our personal data that is being sold, but it is, what we're doing online and the trends that they see. So just kind of an FYI. And I also think that, could be part of negotiations when we, for example, if we are facing a big price hike with Ex Libris, knowing that they're making a lot of money off of us and what we do. So it's kind of interesting to have to pay a lot of money to provide them with information that they can turn around and sell. Another privacy or trend that really concerned me was the textbook publisher data privacy policies. They were horrible. If you have students who are being required to use an online textbook or a course system, those instructors really need to be reading those privacy policies and understand what they're requiring their students to use by requiring those types of textbooks. And then they need to decide if they want to be forcing their students to be giving away that much of their information for profit. And then, of course, keeping an eye on where hopefully a US version of the GDPR goes. And then I still had things to do, even after we created the policy. So we don't have a plan for responding to data requests by law enforcement. And that is recommended as well to go along with your privacy policy. What are you going to do if somebody does show up with a warrant or other lawful document requiring that you turn over some information? This hasn't happened here that I'm aware of, but it would be good to have that in place and know who handles that, where to send people, what to say. Yeah. And then also, we look over vendor licensing agreements for a lot of things. And at the college, they're really looking into accessibility of any new products, but I feel like there's not the same emphasis being put on privacy. So I am trying to raise awareness on our campus about it as part of this new bookstore work group. For example, last week I was assigned a couple of your college's bookstores to go look at and answer a ton of questions on as we try to figure out what we're doing. And there was nothing on there about data privacy. And so I was able to get our college to add a couple of questions to our internal processes, asking all of us who are reviewing the bookstores at other campuses to go in and look at the privacy policies and to comment on those. All right, so before I actually show the policy, any questions? Okay, I have a link, but I'm going to stop sharing and the slides and go to my Word version because I've been having so many issues. So let me share my Word document instead. All right, so we developed a policy and it was approved last month. Let me go through the different parts. We had just a general privacy statement. This is kind of like the elevator speech of the policy, right? And that's the top part. And we reference the right to privacy as set forth in the ALA's Library Bill of Rights, which I actually have as an addendum, an appendix. So typical, just go check. Typical sections in the privacy policy, what information do you collect? So we have that here, the information we pull in from CTC Link at night, also information about our loans. We also are open to the community and we create community patron accounts. There's a little bit of information in there as well. Also, we put in a little bit here about our chat services because we are part of the chat cooperative and that information is collected and stored and outside of our immediate control, but we wanted to just make sure it was on here. And then the next section, what we do with the data. So just letting people know typically how their data is used, which is basically to provide library services. Who has access to the data? So obviously library employees or their proxy. We put that because on one of our branch campuses, some of our lab techs, we only staff that branch. The library and the computer lab are co-located and we only have library staff there a few hours a week. And then the rest of the time, the lab techs are trained to check out books, just a very basic function they've gone through FERPA training, et cetera. So that's why we have library employees or their proxy. And trying to reassure people that we have passwords and we only have permissions assigned for the tasks that we need to do. How we protect the data, this is kind of getting into the meat of it. Explaining what we do with the data. So patron accounts explain that once you're no longer a student or employee, we do eventually get rid of the data. And I didn't put specific timeframes in here because at the end of this policy document, I have a practices document that gets more into the nitty gritty. So just a little bit more about, we have information about your patron account, how we handle the information about what you're borrowing from us, those emails we send out, how we handle copies of those. And then our reference and chat transactions, we wanted to cover that as well. So we don't have students sign in here in the library. We don't have students sign in when we teach, and that's a conscious decision. We know we're missing out on data, being able to collect data about students as they move through, but we just have decided that their privacy is more important to us. At this point, that might change in the future. And then there were other places outside of Alma that we collect data as well. For example, our study rooms do have paper sign-up sheets, and we're probably going to an electronic sign-up system this year. We also get people who want to film in the library pretty regularly. We have a digital filmmaking program here, and the library is a common place that they like to film. And they're supposed to follow a particular procedure for that, but we wanted to add that. Also, we added identifying lost and found items in the library. We don't, we turn everything over to security. We have keep a log physically describing the item, but if it's, for example, a thumb drive, we don't go on and try to determine whose it is or things like that. And then I added a little bit there about patron review of the record, which is something that is typically in a privacy policy. And then I added kind of a disclaimer about third-party vendors. You know, while you're at the library, you may be using other people's systems and services that we don't have any control over, and that's on you to understand what you're doing. And I gave some examples and then how to contact us if you have concerns. So that itself is the policy. And then I added a couple of appendices. So one is the Library Bill of Rights. And then another document, privacy. This is also an ALA document, an interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights. So this goes into a lot more detail about what you should be able to expect from your library as far as patron data. It was actually quite long. And then I have a third appendix, and this is our data handling procedures. And I added this as part of the policy because it's nothing that needs to be hidden from patrons. It's probably more than they need to know. So we've got just the policy. But if anyone ever wanted to know specifically how we're doing things, I do have this, and this helps guide us as well. So I have more of our procedure, how we load data, how kind of an overview of our decisions we made about when and how we purge patron data, the loan anonymization and letters retention jobs. So again, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody would have a clue of what we're doing and how the decisions were made. A little bit about interlibrary loan request handling, our virtual chat transactions. If you are part of Ask WA, you'll know that a few months ago, we had some discussion about requesting patron data being deleted after a year. And that is actually because I was sniffing around asking about it. So we now have a policy for Ask WA. And then kind of repeating some of the stuff that I had said in the policy. So that is the document. I do have a couple of other things that I did create out of this, but I wanted to stop and just see if you had any questions about the policy itself. If
Yeah, I
not,
have a question.
Yeah.
Amy, this is fantastic. I was wondering, back a couple slides when you were talking about requests from law enforcement for patron information when they come in with a written request. I was wondering what other stakeholders in the institution are you contacting about that? And the reason I'm asking is we just had something recently where it was not a written request, but someone supposedly identifying themselves as Homeland Security called the library and wanted to know if a patron had checked out a particular item, right?
Wow.
And this had been forwarded to us from the registrar, right? So this started off some big alarms, and now we're starting to do sort of a campus-wide, like, okay, what happens when these comes in, so that everyone sort of knows how it should be handled. I mean, obviously this was not the procedure that should have happened, but it did, right? Anyway, so since we are having to do that, and I saw that on your slides, I was wondering, are you also involving other stakeholders in that?
That's great. That's exactly why they say that you need that procedure as well as this policy. We don't have that yet. You saw that on my to-do list slide, because we don't have that internally, and I'm not sure that we have one campus-wide, and I haven't gotten there yet. And that is actually on my to-do list for this week, is to start poking around and poking some bears and seeing. As far as I know, we don't have, I haven't seen that on our policies list at an institution level. So we do have a communications office who typically would be the first office that would come to mind, and that's probably where I'm going to start with my inquiries, but I don't know at our campus, and that's a problem. So just, I think we're in the same situation as you, except that you've actually had somebody sniffing around, which is interesting.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah.
That look different in an academic library compared to a public library. It might, in that, yeah, we have the FERPA guarding the educational record, which a public library wouldn't have. Plus, we're just a cog in a much larger wheel. So ideally, our campus itself would have an office or a procedure for what happens when somebody comes asking questions. I think with the public library, it would be really, really important as well, because you don't have like the larger institution to fall back on. And I know I believe each college is assigned an assistant AG. And so that could be another place that you could get some guidance for your college, I would assume. I am not allowed to talk to the AG for Olympic College. I got into it legally with ProQuest a number of years ago about something, and the AG here only wanted to hear from like dean level or higher. So we had to have middlemen, and it was kind of crazy, but that might be another source that could be helpful. Okay, just a couple quick things. Let me go back to my slides real quick, and then I am almost finished here. Okay, so that was my privacy policy. And then I also had a privacy lib guide, and then the information on the lib guide I have turned into a Canvas module as well. So I've used this, I piloted it in one of my research classes, and I'm going to pilot it again. But I did create a Canvas Commons module. It's pretty basic. So because I don't want to accidentally screw up this session by clicking on the privacy lib guide, in just a second, I'll turn it back over to Carly so she can show it with her screen and I can describe what's on there. But I wanted to, can't remember. Oh, last little tidbit, not related to privacy. I did go to do some traveling and I went to Wales to a Welsh language school. It was an incredible location on the coast, and I have come back and continued that journey. So that was really, really nice part of sabbatical. I didn't realize how important it was to get away and rest and rejuvenate. So if you are faculty and you are able to do that, I've been here 20 years. I've been eligible for 14 years and not done it till now. And now I'm kicking myself and I'm a fan. It was really good to get away and get that break for a lot of reasons. My health improved physically and mentally, and highly recommend it. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing. And Carly, if you could maybe share the LibGuide for me. For those who join late, I'm having trouble. I tend to get kicked out of Zoom when I go to share a web page. So this is the LibGuide, just kind of some definitions on the front page here. I started, I saw another guide that I liked a lot and got permission to copy, but then I made so many changes to it, it doesn't look anything like it. So I didn't end up giving credit to it. And then the second page, again, these are just kind of overviews, different types of personal data. This is really meant to be kind of low level and for student facing. And then a list of those things that were on my slide, like GDPR, FERPA, et cetera. And then this started, I did copy this from somewhere else. I think it was 5 or 6 suggestions originally, and I just keep adding to it and building it out. So these are like actual suggestions for students to go about protecting their privacy online, not just when they're using the library, but just in general. And we actually have made this into a little postcard. Not all of these, I picked the top 6 ones and made it into a little postcard. And then one of our librarians who does our promotion and marketing, she bought these little camera covers. And so we're stapling the little privacy camera cover to the postcard with these suggestions as kind of just a giveaway for students or faculty when I do presentations. And then just an overview of our privacy policy, which I've already shown you. Links to other privacy policies of some of our vendors that we have in the library and on campus in case anyone's interested. And then the last one, these are really interesting. These are just kind of games. The second one is just a test that you can go through to get a score at the end of how savvy you are about your data privacy and protecting it. And then the top one is this crazy little game. You're trying to opt out of basically cookies and
now
data
I feel like
collection
we gotta
attempts.
play it.
Yeah, so click on it. It's gonna load. Give it a second. Play now. So I actually did go look at the privacy policies for both of these things. So go ahead and click play now. And it's gonna load all these. And they're all timed. So it asks you a series of questions, and in each one you have to try to opt out.
Would you like to not?
So you can see they just get trickier and trickier and trickier. So yeah, it's just to emphasize the idea that sometimes opting out of data collection can be not obvious, and companies are pretty sneaky about it. I will say GDPR is really starting to kick in and protect us from a lot of these really underhanded, sneaky things. So the game is kind of serious, but also kind of tongue in cheek. So anyway, that's it. That's all I have. I can send out the links, or I think Carly put most of them in the chat.
Yeah, I think I did get most of them into the chat. I am particularly interested by the practices that you came up with. Standardizing some purge dates and expiration dates and those timelines across the state is something that I think would be valuable to all of us, as well as just having a guideline on retention. And I do get that, like, different colleges may have different patterns of enrollment. But I think some of the questions that you probably had to ask to come up with those timelines are valuable for us to consider.
I think it would really depend by college, but maybe a document with like some best practices or suggestions if you aren't sure where to start, or best practices with an explanation.
One of the and this is like a little bit off from patron privacy, but one of actually more than one, a couple of librarians that I know have recently, just in the last few weeks, received calls from people claiming to be patrons and asking if the library has certain book titles. And it starts off innocuous enough with things that you're like, yeah, I'll look that up. And like, yes, we have it. And then it can go one of two ways. It can go towards banned book titles, and people seeking to want to know like what they can come in and demand to take off the shelf. But the other thing that was interestingly happened to one of the people I know is the person calling did not have a like native English speaker accent, and started asking about titles that, when the librarian restated for like, did I get that title right, were like weird, like using American voices to patch together, like I can steal your data kind of things. Like yeah, it was like creating an automated script of like an American female voice saying,
Oh, that's creepy.
yeah, and so like, and I don't think that ever happened to me, but I do remember like calls where they tried to get me as a librarian, because we pick up the phone and we want to answer questions, to say certain things that they were recording. So
Interesting. Yeah, that's good information to share out. We haven't, I've been here 20 years and we've only had one book challenge, which is part of our collection management policy. There's a form on there. And when we pointed out that they needed to have read the thing in its entirety before we'll consider it, they just didn't move forward with it. But the way, I think this is common at libraries, the way that books get banned here is people either steal them or they check them out and don't return them. So anytime we buy anything to do with witchcraft, it's gone very quickly and mysteriously. So I think that is probably more common than people doing formal book challenges. I don't know who the rest of you find.
be a very fun, different call to talk about what books disappear.
Books about Bigfoot disappear, which surprises me. I don't understand that one.
They go out hunting and they just lose them. I mean, I don't know.
We had a class, an English class, that was doing the power of language, and they were doing a unit on profanity. And so I actually had a book, and it was called something like Fuck the History of the Word. I had to reorder that book like 3 times because it just would go missing like instantly.
All right. Well, I am going to end the recording if no one else has any questions.